Kia ora koutou katoa. Today we are here, I'm here, to talk about potential MDRS opt-out for Plan Change 14. Specifically, if this works, there we go. We want to cover off the detailed changes that are forthcoming to the Act to potentially allow for the opting out, withdrawal and full part of Plan Change 14. I'm going to go over the criteria that's involved, show potential options that are available for opting out, just fundamentally really seek feedback on both the options and whether the council is seeking to opt out, and confirm our next steps in the process. We are under a fairly compressed time frame considering the deadline for Plan Change 14 delivery is still the 12th of December this year. The Environment Select Committee last month released its report to Parliament on what's known as colloquially as RM Bill 2, and that introduced a schedule specifically for Plan Change 14 to allow it to opt out. We anticipate that this legislation will be made into law next month. It's went through its second reading last week, and third reading is expected in the next week of August. It allows for a withdrawal in full or part, subject to meeting the tests under the proposed bill. It doesn't, however, mean that there's a possibility to change any of the medium or high density areas that we've already zoned through Plan Change 14. This legislation is really focused on how much more to zone rather than removing anything else that we have currently zoned through Plan Change 14. The bill proposes a criteria meaning that we need to provide for a commercially feasible capacity of 30 years at high growth scenario plus 20% contingency, as per we were going for housing growth. That is a supply requirement target of 65,600 or thereabouts. And there are no other directive requirements other than that. This is at the Minister's discretion. So the Minister needs to be satisfied that we've done the right work to demonstrate commercially feasible and alike. Staff have been engaged with the Ministry to test our thinking on this and really with our minded to evaluate that. And we're confident that the work that we've done is underway at the moment can meet that test. However, that's still subject to the ministerial approval as well. As currently zoned, it is anticipated that additional medium density is required to meet that figure of 65,000. And so in order to achieve that, our council must accept a further IHP recommendations for medium density for how far to go. Come back to that one in a moment. So as you previously saw in the last presentation, the current benchmark factors in actual growth in terms of what is projected by Stats NZ over the next 30 years, which is just over 27,000, and then has a contingency on top of that through the NPSUD, which adds about another 5,000. And so the target that we have under the current NPSUD is about 32,000 houses that we need to achieve. The opt-out requirement is aligning with the high growth scenario, which over 30 years changes to just over 54,000, and then has a 20% contingency, it's about another 11,000 on top of that. And so because the benchmark that we have to meet is doubled, we do not anticipate that the current operative district plan will meet that requirement. So in terms of the operative district plan, this is a very high-level overview of our residential zones as we've currently got it. No doubt you'll be familiar with the 10 centres that have high density and their surrounds, shown in orange there, and then not so clearly on this image, but anyway, be able to see the yellow areas for medium density we have for those local centres as well. All of the purple is existing equivalent medium density that we have. So we have a fair amount of equivalent medium density, mainly around the central city and select other areas around the city as well. And that is a mixture of enabling 2 or 3 stories across that area. What you'll see in this image is that some of those high density areas are more or less an island in terms of there's no transition from those to being medium density areas and alike, simply because they are wholly new and we haven't yet completed decision making on Plan Change 14. We have drawn up a number of potential options. All of the options are either based on Plan Change 14 evidence or council strategies that the council has endorsed. All of the examples are intended to show how that target can be achieved. So all of them indications that we have that all of them may be an option to opt out. In terms of decision making, there's an interesting kind of split, I guess, with decision making regarding the opt-out scenario. So firstly, in order to meet the criteria, we must have already zoned that area. So the criteria in terms of meeting 65,000 is whether or not the operative district plan meets that. So if we were to progress with opt-out, we must first make the zoning decision of medium density to then demonstrate to the minister to say our existing district plan, as we've currently got zoned, meets that criteria. In terms of decision making and for considering what we would zone, obviously the IHP recommendations must be considered by council, and you're confined to the information that was on record for the IHP. However, how wide you go can take into account other information, because this is a bespoke piece of legislation that enables that. So, for example, infrastructure sufficiency or PT, public transport alignment and the like, is really what's the grabs. So in terms of the four options that we have put forward as examples, the first option is really focused around all key transport routes, all high frequency routes, and that really cements what we had through what we know as the council reply, our final council position to the IHP that we presented, and that also factors in what some of you may remember, the low public transport accessibility approach, and so that's focused on a 10-minute walking catchment of about 800 metres with some restrictions in terms of tree water sufficiency and the like. Option 2 is focused around key commercial centres, and that builds on the evidence that we had from Plan Change 14 on really the most suitable centres on that regard, and basically just growing those in terms of medium density. And option 3 is applying MAP 2, the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan, and what that directs in terms of intensification around centres, around specific corridors and the like as well. And option 4 is a little bit beyond the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan, factoring in the latest routes for high frequency public transport and the like, which we'll cover off. So spatially, they look as follows, and we'll go into detail of that. As you can see, the varying extents of medium density and the like. In terms of their sufficiency, there is quite a mix, and it's really to illustrate really what kind of yield you may get for any of those options. So the highest yield is the council reply that we gave to the IHP, which is focused on all of those transport routes, and that far exceeds the requirement that we have for 65,000. Next cab off the rank is really the enhanced GCSP option, which is factoring in the latest public transport routes, so it's going beyond what we have for Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan, and that's, we anticipate, it moderately exceeds the requirement. The Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan, as it is drafted, we anticipate that would meet the requirement slightly exceed that by a small extent, and then the centre-based approach we would anticipate just meets that, depending on which catchments are adopted around those specific sectors as well. So this is an overview of option 1, which is around all public transport routes. And so what you can see in this map is all the yellow basically is what would be new medium density areas, and then all the hatched areas that are around there, and the red really focus on where it's beyond 10-minute walking catchment or 800 metres, as well as specific qualifying matters or restrictions. So the likes of coastal hazard areas are factored in, and so they're not accounted for, and then also quite low or serviceability for three waters, and that's why you can see the likes of Littleton there and Mount Pleasant and Sumner, despite there being close proximity to those roads, they are highly constrained in terms of three water sufficiency, and that was part of the council reply to the IHP. Importantly, when you compare this direction to the Going for Housing Growth direction, this is more than that. The Going for Housing Growth is focused on currently proposed 400 or 600 metre walking catchment from all those routes. This is 800. So this is why this far exceeds the requirements there for 65,000 overall. In terms of the centres-based approach, this is really focused on all of the high density areas having a transition to medium density, and then select medium density centres being Horswell, Bishopdale and Barrington, which were shown to be the greatest I guess evidence in terms of accessibility to services being extended in terms of medium density as well. What you'll see on this map in terms of all of those colour bands, each one of those is a 200 metre walking catchment, and so the full extent of all of those is currently illustrated just as a wee caveat, so 800 metres is shown for all of those, but what we currently anticipate may just meet the requirement is an extra 400 metres of medium density around high density areas, and an extra 200 metres around those medium density centres for Bishopdale, Barrington and Horswell. Importantly as well, in this scenario and all of the subsequent scenarios, it would also transition all of that existing equivalent medium density to the new PC14 medium density. There's quite a complication at the moment in terms of different frameworks, different medium density alike throughout the district plan, because we're halfway through decision making. It's far simpler in our view to transition all of that to be the new existing medium density for PC14. In terms of the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan, this is focused on Map 2, which is the spatial application of the plan, and that is focused on key centres in terms of extending those outwards and then connecting some of those centres together. And so it's quite similar in terms of its configuration really to the centres-based approach. The main difference is that really it connects through the corridor to Belfast, North Horswell, and also to Hornby as well. What this doesn't factor in is some of the latest public transport routes, and that is in the enhanced option, which we'll cover for a moment. This map, just being clear about it, hasn't been drawn to walkable catchments. It's simply a raw expression of Map 2. So should we progress through this, then there'll be further refinement through that, through catchments and like as well. The enhanced option for Greater Christchurch Plan, like I said, is focused on factoring in the latest public transport routes, mainly Bus 8, which is the port to port, and also the full orbiter ring. And so what this does is it fills in, so to speak, full orbiter ring, and that is really reflecting the fact that 2/3 of all public transport stops are taken within the orbiter ring. And so it's quite a neat narrative to say that, look, if you're within the orbiter ring, you're within medium density. Simple as that. The only exception of that, again, is that connection to those centres of Belfast, Hornby and North Horswell as well. So just to compare the two, to make it a bit clearer, of those Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan options. In the pink here, we have the enhanced extra, if you will, just to be quite clear about that. And what that also does is it coalesces, if you will, the medium density that we've already approved. So we have approved 200 metre catchments around all local centres, which is currently in the plan. And so in those blue circles you can see on the map there, it brings all of that together in one kind of uniform medium density conglomerate, if you will. In terms of the work that's needed to progress this, should council wish to opt out, we have to go through the finalising of feasibility modelling because that is the benchmark. If we want to opt out, we need to have confidence that we can demonstrate that sufficiently. Based on where council wants to go, there's also, like I said, redrawing potentially of zoning extents based on walking catchments if that's of interest to council. Of course, if we are to progress with the opt-out option, we do need to make a decision on the zoning before we can apply to the minister. So that needs to happen before we go to the minister. And need to pull together the draft application, respond to any requests. And once, if that is progressed by council, once the minister has approved the opt-out, then we go through the formal process of simply withdrawing the ballots. So withdrawing those areas that aren't zone medium density that are no longer required. So the timeline in terms of today, we're very interested to have a steer on preference on whether or not an opt-out is desired. And then if it is, going through the option development there's potential for drop-in sessions for another workshop as well, depending on kind of feedback we get today. And then in late August, early September, we would be seeking to make concurrent decisions on medium density and also the council decision on opt-out. And so it'd be a single decision report that goes, yep, we're zoning X and Y medium density, and at the same time we're approving council to put an application to the minister to seek an opt-out as well. We'd be going through, or staff would be going through that process through October, November, and then in November, after the new council's formed, would be going through the withdrawal process to meet the target of the 12th of December as well. So that's a compressed overview of the compressed time frame we have before us by the end of the year, should it be progressed. In terms of the options comparison for options, I thought a bit of a high level overview for the options that we've put forward, accepting again at the end of the day that the only requirement is sufficiency. So as long as you meet that number, council can come up with any other option they like in terms of how it wants to slice and dice, so to speak, where it wants medium density. So from option one, in terms of all public transport, the housing yield is exceptionally high. We would anticipate there's a, in terms of the infrastructure, the plan, there is a lot of work to be done to be able to align our infrastructure planning with that form. It's medium density in most places, and so it's quite difficult to plan for, and we'd have to go through that process of the next several years. And in that respect, has a poor strategic alignment in terms of where we're at with the likes of Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan. The centres-based approach has a moderate yield, would meet the requirement, so would meet the 65,000 figure, and so that is sufficiency for the next 71 years in terms of commercial feasibility. It is fairly aligned in terms of infrastructure planning, considering it grows the centres that most of those centres have a form of intensification as it stands already, and in that respect has a moderate strategic alignment as well. The going for housing, the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan has a fairly good degree of housing yield, is fairly well aligned with infrastructure planning, and is highly strategic overall, considering it's a plan that the Greater Christchurch has universally endorsed. In terms of the enhanced option, there is a fairly high degree of yield that we would anticipate through enhanced Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan option. Infrastructure planned in terms of those new areas is fairly low, and so sufficiency for Three Waters within those new areas that we're expanding on is fairly low. So again, more infrastructure planning will be required over the next several years to meet that. But the strategic alignment is fairly high because it is, at the end of the day, building on the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan as well. So that's it in terms of an overview from us. Again, fundamentally, we're very keen to hear from you as much as possible today, really on whether or not fundamentally opt-out is sought, if there is a preferred option, or there's an option 5, wherever that looks, and then confirm the next steps from here and really how you'd like to progress.
Right, Pauline.
So basically, thank you. Like the criteria chart you gave said that all of those would get us over the line.
Yeah, or a slight modification of that. The one that we've got the greatest uncertainty about probably is the centres-based approach. In our view, that's intended to just meet the criteria, and that's it. So it's intended to meet that. It may be that it's more than 400 metres from a high-density catchment, maybe 600 to meet that. We're on the cusp of finalising that feasibility, but that's the intention of that option, is to show exactly how we would meet just the criteria and leave it at that.
Right. Yep. My other question is around contingency. I mean, where did that come from? We pick the numbers, and shouldn't we just stick to the numbers and not worry about contingency, because it's a fairly generous number?
That's been in the National Policy Statement for Urban Development. We've always had to have a contingency. It's designed to ensure that you just don't meet demand, the fact that you've got a bit of a buffer. So that's why they build it in. The requirement previously has been 15% more than the next 10 years demand, and then beyond that you've got to have 10% contingency. So it's always been there, we've always met it. In this case, though, they've just picked on 20% more. So that really comes in this whole flooding the market with capacity, commercially feasible capacity, and that's that principle. If you oversupply the market, you can try and continue to keep prices down. So that's the place.
But I mean, there's the balance, isn't there? Because you don't want the bottom to draw out of it either, necessarily. So, yes, are we being over ambitious? That's my question.
I guess at the end of the day, though, to be honest, we are really at the whim of the Act. And so this is the way that the Act is going. It's anticipated to fall. We're not anticipating any other changes from what the Environment State Committee have stated. And so if council wishes to opt out, it's simply the criteria that we have to meet. Yeah.
So personally, I would like to pursue opting out.
Okay. Thank you. I do believe there is an option 5. It's going back to the housing growth. Allowing at least 6 stories, 1.2, 1.5 kilometres from the CBD. What I'm keen to understand is how much that will enable. If that was including those mixed use areas that we didn't do, including SOMO. My understanding is that's going to be many thousand.
Yeah, so in terms of what would be theoretically possible, that's correct. However, the modelling that we did and evidence that we led through Plan Change 14 in terms of commercially feasibility of 6 stories is it's really only limited to the first city block around the commercial core of the central city. So it's even within the 4 avenues that it's only commercially viable. And so again, from 12 stories onwards, that was where it was seen to be being commercially viable. So in our view, based on that, even if you were to extend 6 stories beyond the 4 avenues, include SOMO and the like, there may be very few limited opportunities for that to be a viable option because it simply isn't commercially attractive to be able to do that.
But this is around enabling growth, whether what might get built soon.
Sure. Yeah.
But we had to make numbers, right? We had to make numbers stack up.
Yeah.
And those areas can hypothetically do that, right?
Yeah, they can, but again, the test is whether or not that's commercially viable. We have no evidence to show that 6 stories within those areas is commercially viable. And moreover, in terms of opting out, that's not even an option that we have because we have only been able to decide on the IHP recommendation beyond that. Council's already made its decision. So in terms of being able to do the 6 stories, that's not an option through opting out.
Okay, so those decisions around SOMO and the Carlton Milk area, you're saying those has now forced us to have to enable a whole lot more intensification out in the suburbs.
Yeah.
That's effectively what we're dealing with now here as a result.
The numbers wouldn't compare though. I mean,
but they'll make a difference, presumably.
not in a significant manner. You actually have to
numbers that we're looking at. Because if everyone in our city wants us to enable more intensification around the city area, and we're potentially about to be doing the opposite.
Yeah, again, anything high density around that will show to be 0% feasible. Anything beyond 4 avenues. And so even if you were to extend, 6 stories beyond the 4 avenues, it wouldn't make any difference in terms of criteria because criteria is to demonstrate whether or not you've got commercially feasible capacity. And so our evidence again is that none of it is commercially feasible beyond the 4 avenues. So it makes 0 difference if we have high density beyond the 4 avenues.
And the easiest way to demonstrate that is actually to show you some examples, even if we ring fence the Sydenham area, how much that would yield to actually give you some practical comparisons. You do need to zone quite a big spatial area to, so it's apples with apples. So we can give you some examples of what it actually practically means spatially, how much you have to actually rezone to get the numbers. It's more than what you would think.
But my view is that we still need to be doing those things and as part of this. Otherwise, again, like in those 4 maps, you've got this great big gaping gap of areas where you can build up, but then it sprawls out into all the suburbs where you can. It's just it's not consistent with what we're trying to.
It doesn't mean that a future plan change. That's the other thing. This isn't the end of the story for the city. We have got, post changes to the spatial planning. We can also again identify other areas to intensify, recognising that in the future, if we have a mass rapid transit stop, again, we're going to have to upzone around those transit stops. So this is a point in time. We just need to make
and this is about making further decisions on Plan Change 14. And so in terms of the opting out, the 6-story high density is not an option. we can't zone for more high density because we've made our policy 3 decision. It's only medium density that is an option for opting out. Yeah, that's quite an important point.
Yeah. So, Mark, please. So sort of building on that, commercially feasible would mean that developers could build property, but then they'd have people to sell it to.
Yeah, at a profit, correct. Yep.
In our city already, people are resistant to buying anything more than 2 stories.
Yeah, and so what the work that we've done today has very much shown us is that feasibility has changed significantly over the last few years. And so costs have gone up and sale prices have gone down, and both of those work against feasibility. And so that's another reason why we would have been pretty confident in terms of the amount of yield that we'd have in terms of being commercially feasible. We don't have that confidence now simply because the market's changed, and the criteria is whether or not it is commercially feasible rather than being enabled, full stop.
And I'm certainly in favour of the opt-out. But have we done analysis to figure out, going from the centre out, is there a point where we could draw a line and say we've got enough within this centre out, then some of the extremities can be left alone?
Yeah, and we can work to do that. What we're saying is that all of the options that we've put forward here would meet that test. That's what we're trying to highlight to you, is that it's a pick and mix potentially in terms of what you like, what you don't like, and we can draw whatever suits and then provide those figures accordingly. But like I said, in terms of the centres-based approach, having a 400 metre extra from all the high density and a 200 metre from those 3 centres, in our view, may meet the requirement. It may be slightly more than that, but that is the do minimum option if that's what you're seeking.
Yep, very good.
Hey, Cal?
Yeah, I'm just interested in the potential financial fishhooks around developing an area, perfect area, it would seem, like Shirley, which has some major route. But I just wonder, we talked before about the extensive cost of upgrading the sewer system to allow development. Is that going to preclude it from being involved at all?
Yeah, so the vacuum sewer restriction that we have was accepted by the hearings panel as being a qualifying matter, and so that would restrict intensification within that extent, and so we wouldn't be in a position where we're, for example, forced to upgrade because of that insufficiency of the network. And so again, this is simply about making further plan change 14 decisions, so subject to your approval, that would simply ratify what the IHP have done, recommended for that restriction. So yeah, that's accounted for.
Sarah, please.
Thanks so much. Amount of work from that. I will note that the decision that we did make on SOMO, the decision basically not to do it, we'd actually taken away the height restrictions, which would have enabled the condition feasibility a bit more, which might have helped. But the MRT stuff and where that sits, so the IHP decided against the root protection kind of stuff. We had the setbacks. With the options that we've got up here, are we able to ensure that we incorporate that into any zoning decision if we do MDRS?
Yeah, what I'd say is that if councillors are concerned about a certain area or then simply the easiest tool is to not zone that area. Because we don't have the ability to have that restriction, because we've been to the minister already in terms of the corridor protections. And so if that is a concern of council, then it simply is to say, well, that's a decision for later on for potential through growth for housing growth.
But are we able to just zone areas that are just very slightly back from that rather than whole swathes? Because we do want, increasing density around what will eventually be the MRT.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you've got
some of that now.
Yeah, so you've got full flexibility, and this is really the opportunity that the Act presents. As long as you can meet that figure, you can cut in as you like.
And that's it, because the thing is, as long as we meet that figure, the minister's not going to be making a decision to overturn it, right?
Correct.
So we can make sure that we upside close to those areas, but back by a little bit.
Sure, totally.
If we can organise that, that would be great.
I think
Whichever way.
so too, yeah.
And I mean, I'm looking at the strategic approach, which is great, but being able to do that while protecting the bridge, I think it's probably a good idea.
Just also the notice of requirement that's been proposed to protect that route as well.
Yeah. Yeah, but what I don't want is while it's going to take potentially a couple of years to get that work done. What I don't want is people building medium density in a space where we're going to be acquiring space in the future and having to buy them out. Yeah.
There still will always be a risk because they can still
Absolutely.
apply for resource consent now for multi-unit development, and it may be quite difficult to define that. So
Just to lower the risk.
I have a couple. The first one is around the maps, and I see that Ireland has a sort of big gaping hole in it, except for the GCSP plus option. Was that because of the noise contour that was enacted, or did we just miss it for other reasons?
In terms of option 1 comparison,
Yeah, so you've got not the transport routes, but you've got option 3, the GCSP one,
oh, yep,
and then it goes beyond GCSP and then it adds Ireland.
yep.
Is there a reason for that?
I think that the GCSP didn't factor in bus route 8, which
Oh, I see, okay. So
it's trying to cut through towards Ireland, and so it didn't factor it in. And so this is where the enhanced is trying to fill in that blank, factor in the latest information, and then fill in that area to reflect the walking catchment
Okay.
from bus route 8.
And if we wanted to make any changes with catchments, it needs to be backed up by evidence, correct?
Not at all. And so in terms of where we go,
Yep.
we can choose whatever, or council can choose whatever information it likes in terms of where we go, how far we go.
Okay.
In terms of what is within that, that has to be the IHB information. So in terms of how you control medium density or alike, that has to be the IHB record. How far you go, choose whatever you like to.
And just to note, the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan as a principle does clearly state growth or intensification along public transport routes, full stop. And just the map
Yeah.
2 may not have included that bus route. It's highlighted as a priority bus route, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the words didn't in themselves encourage that anyway.
Yeah, certainly a principle. And so option 3 is really a raw expression of map 2. It doesn't apply the wider kind of output. So.
Cool. We just installed a lot of wastewater infrastructure in Ireland, and I was thinking, why is that hole there? The last question I have is particularly around that transport corridor. I still wasn't clear on what Sarah was talking about. So we put in that obviously a qualifying matter for the city spine transport corridor for MRT going from.
No, it's just been rejected.
Yeah, it was. So that's why.
Yeah.
Does that mean that we can't enact it according to what we'd want in terms of the catchment? So we have to stop the development from happening along that.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, the simplest way is to not zone it in terms of its restriction. But like Sarah said,
Wow,
people can still progress their own their own consent for that for medium density, because some of those areas, if you look at the existing kind of construct, some of those areas are already enabled for a form of medium density, and so that can be progressed really today as it stands. So there's quite limited opportunity we have. The best tool that we have is to not zone it really, but you know, at the end of the day, the only real gaps are between Church Corner and the Pico Shand area, and then also from Maryvale to Papanui, and then from Papanui to Belfast. So those are the only real gaps, if you will, and debatable how effective long-term.
I
But
think what I'm worried about is the setbacks, because if we allow airspace above footpaths, for example, we could actually restrict those transport routes. So would there be any flexibility around setting setbacks but enabling them in?
no, so this is a quite an important. I'm glad you raised this.
So it's really complex.
No, it's quite an important feature of what is being proposed in the bill, and that is that if council accepts, in making its decision, accepts further medium density, but goes, hey, look, we want to do an alternative approach, and so it will refer again to the minister for certain elements,
Okay.
then that part can't be withdrawn until the minister has settled. So it's quite a gamble if council progresses to go, yep, we're going to have medium density here, but change the setbacks, because that would be an alternative. And so I'd caution and think quite carefully about doing that, because that runs the risk of not being able to meet that criteria.
In short, the most effective way is to protect the corridor through destination. That is the most effective.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, mate. Aaron?
So a couple of questions just around some of the numbers. What's feasible? Do you have a number on that?
So
I've done a Google, so I'm not feasible, so just see if the two match.
yeah, so commercially feasible, the guidance that the government endorses is a 20% profitability. And so simply is costs versus sale, and the net of that is 20% more than that, then that's counted as being commercially viable.
So what number are we using in Christchurch? So there's a sale price.
Yep, well, it depends on the typology, councillor. So there's not
Well, the median income's 91,000. So on that, with one child, you're allowed to borrow 590,000 or 544,000 with two children and one car, which means you're buying houses at 600,000 with a
Yep, so
10% deposit.
Yep, so the test isn't
That's not what's
affordable.
doing it.
It's quite a big distinction. The test isn't affordable. The test is whether or not you can make a profit.
So,
Affordability is not part of this matrix.
It's whether it's commercially viable.
okay, so but that's not reality.
Yeah, but that's
But that's the test that we have to make.
Okay, so then the other non-reality rule that we're using is the public transport routes. Why do we have this obsession with planning around public transport routes? And have we seen any impact in the last, let's say, 30, 40 years and people going, oh yeah, there's a bus route I'm going to buy there, or can I put 3 apartments there because everyone wants to catch the bus? Because 5% of people are catching the bus. And the number just, it hasn't moved since the quakes. It's 15 years.
we're heading in that direction, and we've got
We're
some.
not heading in any direction. No one's catching the bus.
5% increase in the last year.
Yes,
So
up in the last.
it's crawled its way up to 5%. So 95% are not using public transport, yet we're using it as our lever for planning. That makes no sense.
One thing we can say is when we zone land or when we upzone land,
Yep.
we do see an increase in housing take-up rates, and we've provided you
Yeah,
evidence for that.
that's true.
And that we can provide that again.
Yeah.
And we have planned historically, we have planned intensification with public bus accessibility. So we have been doing that for many decades now.
Yeah.
And so
And what's the payoff been?
we have
Because-
back with in terms of public transport versus usage rates. But the key thing here is where you upzone land, you absolutely see a take-up rate in terms of housing over those densities.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing with that. It's just our obsession around planning around PT when there's only 5% using it.
But the thing is, if there's a 5% using it because areas have been zoned in those areas, what would have happened if we didn't do that? Like, it might have only been 1% using public transport, right? It's hard to tell the negative.
Yeah, and then the other one is that we think that the MRT is some sort of golden goose, but the globally, if you do a Google search, you can't have successful MRT without a 4,000 per square kilometre density of people. We'll never get that in Christchurch because no one wants to live in 8 stories along the route,
It doesn't require that.
and we can't afford to build it that high.
So townhouse development
Yep.
will still yield a very high yield to support public investment along that major corridor. So we've and the evidence that was led through the indicative business case for the mass rapid transit, that has a lot of facts and figures within it as well that will show you.
Yeah, because the subsidy's going up every year exponentially more than the amount of people catching it. So putting on more and more service, but we're not getting more and more uptake. So
It's a long-term strategy.
Okay, thank you. We're moving along. I've still got 6. Yanni, please. Then back.
So just to be clear, current zoning capacity is?
The current zoning capacity that we anticipate, because we're in the final stages of our feasibility modelling, is that it meets the existing demand criteria. That's quite straightforward, but does not meet the opt-out demand, but not by much. We're anticipating, potentially 20% off the mark. So it's not a great degree. Like I said, only extending the high density by 400 metres and those medium density areas by 200 metres potentially meets that yield. So we're not far off.
So the change of PC14 when the government made their decision, what's been the difference in extra capacity that's been added in terms of zoning?
So I can probably answer that. Every time we run a commercial feasibility model, the numbers will differ. So at the time, the market was more favourable. So the commercial feasibility was higher. Because we have to rerun it at this point in time, costs have changed, they've gone up, land values and sales price have stayed pretty steady. So therefore the commercial feasibility is a lower number. Also through Plan Change 14, we reported 3 numbers. So we reported what is plan enabled. So we call it the big building envelope. So the biggest capacity, if you fully redevelop to the pushing to the extent of the rules, it gives you an enormous number.
And what was that?
It was about 800,000 minus, say, we took it down to 500,000. But that's plan enabled and that's not realistic.
No, but just if everyone's built to what the current zoning capacity allows, you're saying we can get 500,000.
But it's not
Yeah,
real,
but-
it's not
But
realistic.
that's not the test. The test
the
is if
test.
it's commercially viable, if you can sell it for a profit. That is the test at the end of the day, councillor. So
Understood.
regardless about plan enabled, that's not the test for opting out.
So actually what this points to is just rezoning land. Doesn't actually, and creating more capacity when you've already got huge excessive capacity, doesn't actually lead to more affordable housing.
Like they're two separate.
Right? And this is what GCP work has shown. That basically, like, there needs to be a different approach.
just got this is MDRS.
This is not the part of the criteria for opting out, councillor. So
That's right.
the test is simply about whether or not we meet that high growth scenario plus 20%. And so regardless of the merits, if we want to opt out, we need to meet that
So
test.
do we have any trend data over time, post-earthquake or pre-earthquake, over what that commercial, like what's the trend? Have we got any trend data around what the trend has been around commercial
The
feasibility
commercial, it goes up.
and land that we've, rezoned repeatedly? I think the problem is that we keep getting different rules to add extra capacity to that are not consistent with the
Yeah.
previous ones. And so actually understanding what's happening in terms of trends is really difficult.
I think at the end of the day, it needs to be recognised that, again, commercial viability is about the sale. A big part of it is the sale price. And sale price is determinative of what you're willing to pay, and what you're willing to pay is determinative of the economy. So just as the economy goes up and down, commercial feasibility goes up and down.
So
It simply isn't comparable between 3 years ago today, that there's not going to be the same numbers. There just simply aren't.
Yeah, I've got to move on. I've got one more question, please.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of getting good urban design and, getting, so not necessarily restricting intensive housing, but actually getting better design in terms of having trees, having green space, having
Storage.
storage, having places like, for example, a lot of the pressure I'm getting in my area where I'm seeing massive amounts of intensification, and I presume most of it's commercially feasible, because a lot of it's probably going to Airbnbs. But I'm seeing like there's flooding impacts, there's traffic impacts. It's creating dangerous areas for people in terms of just that general quality of life. What is the best option where we can have control over getting good urban design outcomes and also actually having, some impact on allowing the development that makes sense in terms of transport or traffic?
So in terms of the decision for opting out, it's only about whether or not you're accepting more of the IHP's recommendations. Simply as that.
Yep.
And like I said earlier, there's a caveat there around if you choose to do something else, then there's a restriction that you're simply not going to meet the opt-out criteria. If you're worried about a certain area, the simplest solution is to go, we're not going to have medium density in that area, and find it elsewhere. At the end of the day, it's about using the Plan Change 14 recommendations as how we want to cut our cloth if we're seeking opt-out.
Great answer. Thanks, Ike. Claire, please.
My questions come out for a workshop,
It's okay. We're good.
open session, I mean.
Well, I just, looking at the criteria chart that you put up for, looks to me like if we are going to progress work on an opt-out, that I would say option 3 would be the one to pursue. So, if leading guidance on that, I don't know how others feel about it, but it looks like it's got more benefits across the board than others, particularly with round infrastructure. Yep.
Tyrone, are you waiting?
Kia ora.
patiently?
Yep, thank you, Your Worship. So, this is quite a Littleton specific question, as if you'd expect anything else. But so just now that the dust settled on the minister's decision, like, how do those decisions, the PC14 things, affect Littleton specifically? Right, still potentially subject to MDRS, right?
Yeah, that's right. So the minister's decision was only about the matters that council rejected from what the IHP had recommended. And so I don't believe any of that, could be wrong, but I don't think any of that was specifically related to Littleton. And so there's no impact really in terms of the decision from the minister in that regard. We do still have to progress with making a complete decision on Plan Change 14 by the 12th of December. With or without opt-out.
Right. So, I mean, are there sort of things that could mean that Littleton's considered suitable or not suitable for intensification? You know, like sort of heritage things or, you know, infrastructure requirements or whatever?
Yeah, so again, if we were to decide on greater intensification within Littleton, that would be focused on what the IHP recommendations are for that area. So it would be, if we were to, for example, extend what is currently zoned for medium density around the commercial centre, that would be also the same vein, accepting recommendations on character areas and also on those heritage areas as well. And so it simply is about providing for more of what the IHP has recommended. At the end of the day, like I said, in terms of how far you go or where you go, that is up to you. You can use your own kind of considerations for that. Ultimately, at the end of the day, in terms of meeting the criteria for opt-out, again, if you meet the global, figure of 65,000, then so be it.
Thanks, sorry, that's good.
Okay, thanks. Cheers.
Hi.
I wanted to ask, the first one was about intergenerational well-being, etc. And when we read the room, there was not many of the younger generation to be talked about. So I wanted to know if there's going to be any consultation with the public around options.
No, at the end of the day, we're about deciding on the IHP recommendations. So again, in terms of how far you go, council can choose its own considerations for how far you go. In terms of the rules that are enabled within that area, that is purely the IHP recommendation.
And for us to be more informed around the commercial feasibility of all of these developments, etc., and the market, excuse me, but I'm hypothesising here, but I'd probably say that young professionals and retirees and long-term residents will probably be in the CBD, where families will probably be more in the suburban areas. They're in good school zones, like Island School, for example, where everyone wants to buy there. That sets the house price up. Cashmere, for example, great school, bring the house price up. With that hypothesis, would you say that's a fair assessment in the way that the market is going at the moment? We're seeing $10,000 per square metre for a development in CBD, maybe 3.5 for a new one in Cashmere.
It's complex. It's a model. It all depends on the land value as well. So land value, build cost, sales price. It varies across the city, but we certainly see over time some parts of the city that 2 years ago wasn't commercially viable, because there is now demand and they're getting a good sales price. They're now commercially viable.
Based on amenity, right?
It can be, yes. Yes, there's lots of factors that drive that, but where that sales price is, but it's also to do with land value.
Are we able to get that information by chance to help us be informed?
Yes, we can give you there'll be a report that is produced.
Me, at the likes of, say, Apollo Stadium, that at the moment is zoned. That's not in your workings out, is it?
No, not at all, and it can't be, to be blunt, because at the end of the day, again, we're confined by the IHP recommendation.
Yes.
We're not talking about rezoning, change it in zone type or like. It's about saying how much of existing residential areas you want medium density. Simple as that.
Yes. Okay, so the likes of the RPS, which the government told ECAN to back off on for a bit, there could be a lot happening there, but you can't count any of that either.
Completely correct.
Yeah. So, and just one last question. So, say we extend some of the areas from 400, 500, whatever metres, and people, and it covers you for the amount of numbers to end up your 65,600. It doesn't mean to say the person has to build that on there. I know they're commercially sensitive, but they're commercially profitable, but if they want to build one story, they can. They don't have to, but it works for your numbers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The only limitation is that within the high density zone, a minimum 2 stories is minimum. But that the commercial feasibility of that probably stacks up more than single story. So
Okay, right, what have we got?
So Phil, which
Probably won't see.
We've got 33 minutes and Mark was.
do you have preference of which one?
I think just before you go into this, we're all of the opinion that keep working towards opt-out. Is that what we're generally?
Yeah, so what we're very interested on is a steer on which option to progress. But what I'm hearing is that potentially a drop-in session within the next couple of weeks would be a good avenue.
Yeah, I'm just unable to give a preferred option at the moment.
No, that's fine.
To find as many, to explain to us how you can find as many little numbers without the least amount of impact on people. So
Option 1 won't be feasible though, will it? It's the infrastructure.
No, that's right. So that's why the matrix is really helpful, because you've got your infrastructure. That's why that comes.
so you take the likes of Princess Lake Hospital, you don't count that either, because it's not.
No, and it's zoned for hospitals. So
Yeah, that's right, but one day it could well be houses, or Christchurch Women's Hospital in town.
yeah.
Yeah, so there's, yeah. Okay, so Mark, we have one question from you, and then that'll be. Thanks.
I'd be quite interested to see some form of numbers provided to us around how far out we could draw the line and not have to do. I mean, my primary thinking is, look, in Hornby, we've had the high density done to us, and I know my community is not going to be happy about further medium density. So if there is a way to leave that out of meeting the criteria,
Yeah,
that would be useful.
I guess like we like I showed earlier, what I'd encourage all councillors to think about, is the interface. The interface with high density areas. So in likes of Hornby, we have high density zone, and that would transition to being suburban.
Yes.
And so in our view, it's worth considering whether or not a transition to medium density before you go suburban would be desirable.
A tapering off sort of area.
And remember, a lot of those areas already have what's called the residential suburban transition zone, which permits 4 units as a permitted activity.
Yeah, so most of that's on the northern part now.
Yeah, because the reason people have bought in those sorts of areas is because A, it's affordable, and B, they're getting their lifestyle with a bit of grass. So to be forced into the idea of having neighbours come along and build out their landscape.
That's good. I think you know where we're heading, and fantastic answers and fantastic presentation. So thanks very much.
And option 3.
Option 3 hybrid.
We certainly arrange a drop-in session. We may also come back to you for another information session, because a number of the questions that sometimes we receive in drop-in sessions, we have from others, and it's beneficial if you all have the same answer. Secondly, we're still looking for that steer on the preferred option in terms of where, and the information session will be more beneficial than drop-in sessions for that.
But it's also if you come to us and say, that much short, if we do, as you will, if we do this little bit here, that will get us over the line, because it's, as you say, it's just a number.
And council needs to recognise that going for housing growth is on the horizon, and the lifespan of what we decide for opt-out, if we progress to that, may be very short-lived.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you very much.
So just what's the next step? Another workshop notice?
Let's check. Sorry, it's one last question. If we, with going through housing growth coming, if we did enough now, like we just above the minimum, kind of the 65, is there the potential that we wouldn't need to do another big plan change with going for housing growth? Like if we had enough done, then we wouldn't have to go through all of the expense of it again.
The capacity is only one element of going for housing growth. The other side of it would also be about the high density around Central City and the high density around Tapanui, Riccarton, and other parts of the city potentially as well. And so there is a whole other element of going for housing growth that we just can't factor in.
But if we could find ways to minimise what we have to do next time, that would be really useful, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll get Mike to talk to you.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you, mate. Good, 11, guys, and we're having a parks update.